Hello and welcome to the Wellbeing Evolution. We are sat here with Terry in Glasgow for a chat and just to find out about Terry's life, and we will kind of expand from there.
Yeah.
So, Terry, hello. So can you, I suppose, the main curiosity we have is the range of experiences that you've had. And so maybe the best place to start is when that started for you. So can you tell us about where life started for you?
Oh well, 1933 it started.
Okay.
And apparently I was adopted at 5 days old because the rules were different then.
Right. So you could just go.
You could just go and get a baby.
Yeah.
Apparently then. Anyway, but the couple who'd adopted me were quite old. So I had always old parents,
Okay.
and I was quite jealous as a kid of my friends who had young parents, And
so how much older were they than you?
Oh well, they were about 45 or.
Right. Well, that's a lot older at that time as well.
At that time, particularly, yeah. And I don't know anything much about my mother. I know a name and Dalmuir West, which is Clydebank, just on the outskirts of Glasgow. That's all I know. Mm-hmm. And that she was 18. And I can imagine that it was very bad for her at that time because they were putting women in asylums because they were pregnant and not married and doing things like that. So she must have had a hard time. But that's all. And I was never really all that curious, to be honest.
No.
You know.
And did you know that?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And did you know that from quite early on, or did they tell you?
No, not till I was 21.
Okay.
That's when my adoptive father died, and my mother had gone and she'd been up all night. He died in the house.
Right.
He'd cancer and he'd been ill for quite a while, so they sent him home from hospital.
Okay.
And my mother was nursing him, and she'd gone to bed, and in the morning, and I got up and. He died, and I thought, well, I better go and look out papers and things like that, and that's when I found the adopted papers.
Oh, really?
But I wasn't bothered. I mean, it wasn't a big sort of
Yeah, not an upheaval.
No, it wasn't. No, didn't bother me that much. No.
So, the natural question that would arise from when you say 1933 is obviously memories of the war. Mm-hmm. So
I was 6 when it started.
Right, so you were nearly a teenager by the time it ended.
I was.
So
I
you
was
must have
coming up for 13. Mm-hmm.
And what kind of memories stand out?
Oh, tons. I lived in Stranraer, which was an advantage. The people in the city really suffered. But we could get extra eggs from the farms and things like that, and rabbit stew and things like that. Whereas in the city they were strictly on ration. And one of the bigger words that I learned very early on was availability. Because it always said, you had your rations, and it always said availability. Because sometimes they had 1 egg a week, but sometimes there wasn't any eggs. Things like that. And I learned that word very early on. Mm-hmm. But when they were bombing Belfast, they used to cross over.
Right.
Stranraer going back to Germany, and one time I must have been about, I don't know, maybe 8 at the time, and they dropped a landmine. They must have had an extra landmine that they hadn't got rid of, and they dropped it in a field, frightened a few cows. Yeah. And my father was the sort of Captain Mannering of the Stranraer Home Guard.
Oh, right.
Looked a wee bit like him as well. Actually, he was bald and small.
Okay.
And. So the Home Guard was guarding this field till the bomb disposal guys, because it didn't go off, you see, and the bomb disposal guys came and they got it. And my father had a ring made out of the metal of the landmine. Nice. And I remember he had.
Do you remember could you hear them dropping?
Oh,
through the air.
We actually could recognise a German plane from a British plane. You grew up very, very quickly, And when I was talking to the kids at the school, when I was giving that lecture to the kids at the school, I cut out an awful lot because Stranraer's a U-shaped loch. Right? Mm-hmm. And anything that gets in off the Irish Sea, it doesn't get back out again. It just washes in and out until it eventually comes up to the land. The way the tide goes. Right. And bodies came in fairly regularly. And so this was a thing, if you were going to school and you'd see people running down and you go, oh, and you go.
Chase it, yeah.
We were ghouls, we loved dead bodies at that time, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, this was an excitement, you know.
Yeah, right.
And you didn't think of them as people, you know what I mean? It was a dead body and we were terrible when I think about it. But, you know.
Well, in a way, it's quite good that you had that reaction, right? Otherwise,
I've never been afraid of anything like that since, because we were so used to that.
Yeah.
But one of my early memories was Churchill giving his speech. We'll fight them on the beaches. We'll fight them on, you know,
the classic,
the streets and all that. And the next day in school, we were all sitting in the playground and we were all deciding how we were going to fight. That's how naive we were.
Yeah,
right? And I had a skip rope, so I was going to trip soldiers up. Okay. And one of the boys had a catapult. He was going, and another boy said he was going to get his mum's brush pull and put a knife, tie a knife on the end of it. So this is we were all set to fight in the streets.
Yeah, so you definitely weren't hiding away. You weren't.
We were planning all this. You know.
Did you feel scared by it? Or?
No. I think. Because we were only 6, like my contemporaries, you accepted it as a norm almost, you know. And okay, I'd come up to Glasgow because my grandparents, you know, adoptive grandparents, all that lived here, and I'd see damage, like bomb damage and things, and that was quite interesting, I thought, at the time. Yeah. And I mean, people in the tenements, they had no shelters; they just stood in the entrance.
Wow.
And all they had was a baffled wall on the pavement to stop blasts. But if a bomb came, the whole tenement just went down. And in Clydebank, when they were bombing the 3 nights and 3 days, they bombed Clydebank because the shipyards were there. And they'd followed the moon up the river, up the Clyde, but they bombed the wrong side, so it was all the houses that they bombed.
Really?
Oh, crikey.
And there was, I can't remember, I think it was about 5,000 people died because it was really packed.
Heavy.
And I remember years later when I came to live in Glasgow, I was visiting friends, and an elderly man came in and they gave him some tea and he went away, went away. And they told me after he was away that he'd been in the Merchant Navy and came home and leave and couldn't even find his street, and he'd lost his wife and 5 children. Just like that, in those 3 nights, you know. There was no landmarks, it was just all rubble everywhere.
Wow. And I remember you, in the past, you talked to me about some of the Germans that ended up.
Oh, we liked them, the ones on the newsreels, we booed at them. You see, when you saw it on a Saturday morning, we booed at them. Yeah. But the ones that were prisoners of war, we had a prisoner of war camp. First it was Italians and then they moved away. And then it was Germans come in after the African campaign when they got captured. And they worked in the town, a lot of them, you know, because the men were away. So they'd work in farms and they'd do all sorts of jobs, you know. And we knew them. I mean, well, we didn't know them personally, but you sort of, they said hello and you said hello back. And you saw them as people. So we didn't and they wore a brown suit with a big yellow POW on the back, you know, paint. But they could stay in the town till they didn't need to be back in camp till 11 o'clock at night. So there was quite a few romances and things.
Right.
And about 3 of them actually married Srigar girls and stayed after the war.
And what was the feeling that you had, and maybe if you were aware of other people's feeling around? Did you always have like a sense or certainty that the war would be won?
I think most, well, at the beginning, near the beginning, I don't think people had that. We were expecting to be invaded any minute, so there was a big sort of fear, I think, of the adults at that time. You know, we were all set to fight, but the adults, I think, had a sense of, oh gosh, you know, because my father had been in the First World War, you know, and they'd lived through the First World War, so they were really, you know, because when it was announced on the radio, I was 6 and I was sitting on the floor. I can remember it distinctly. because it was so unusual, sitting on the floor playing, and my mother was listening to the radio, and all of a sudden she burst out crying. I'd never seen an adult cry before. So I was absolutely, I said, what is it? And she went, we're at war. And I sort of knew the word war, what it meant, but it didn't. So I went into school the next day, and of course everybody was talking about it, and you see, but and then of course the blackout. You couldn't go out to play in the winter because at 4 o'clock or 3 o'clock it was dark.
Yeah.
So you couldn't go out to play.
What did you do?
Well, people who had brothers and sisters played table games, like things like that. I didn't have anybody, so I sort of read all the time.
So you were an only child? Right.
Well, they're so old, they took me and,
And something I know about you is that you are an avid reader, so do you think that's where it started?
Oh yeah, I think so.
Really?
Yeah. My father had a big cupboard in the living room, and it was just literally full of books. Like it was the classics, like Walter Scott and Dickens and all that. And I went through all those very early.
Really?
And I was taught by nuns in the primary, and in the secondary I was sent to boarding school. But they were very religious. Adopted parents. Not me. I'm an old atheist. But anyway. But
how did that?
It happened early. I never ever really believed. I mean, it was pushed into us at school all the time, and I would say to myself, I don't believe that. I mean, even from an early age, I thought, that's rubbish.
And how were your parents around?
I had to hide that.
Oh, did you?
Oh, goodness gracious!
Forever, really.
Many a thumping I got. Because,
really?
Oh, one of the classics. Her clothes were in ration during the war, as well, and she got me this coat, and it was I thought it was old-fashioned. This colour, it was horrible, and I said, I'm not wearing that, and she went, you're wearing it. And of course on the Sunday there was 2 masses in the chapel on the Sunday, and I used to try and go to the different one from them, you see, so I didn't go. But anyway, I got on my bike and went down the pier the first Sunday with this coat on, and at the end of the pier in Stranraer, it's a ferry port, you see, and it was just railway sleeper on the ground, right? So I had the front wheel of the bike up on the railway sleeper, and I was sitting on the saddle, and a boy came up and hit me in the back, so the bike and I went into the sea. And all the colour came out of this coat. What a beating I got that day.
Because you clearly weren't in church.
Apart from that, and the fact that she had to get my coat dyed. And then I wore it to school, it was navy blue, and I didn't mind it then. But she swore I did it on purpose until the day she died, and she was 80 odds. She kept telling my children, she was a devil. And she always told them that. And I was an awkward child, I must admit.
But you spent a lot of time reading, you were saying. And what were there any particular books that influenced you that you enjoyed most?
I think all of them, really. I mean, I was always really good at English at school. That was because I read all the time. I think that's a big help, in English. But I love Dickens. That was my first real love, was Dickens and that. But I went through all sorts. Now I liked Cadfael, the Ellis Peters books and that. And I've found another couple of authors that do medieval sort of mysteries, and I find that quite interesting because they didn't have any. I mean, it had to be all logic that they used. There was no other way of figuring it out. So I quite enjoy them. But I mean, I read books about archaeology and things like that in between. I like to sort of have the light ones and then something a bit more serious.
And so has it always been a big feature of your life?
Oh all my life.
Really?
And when I was I was widowed with kids. I've been married 3 times and widowed 3 times. The first time I was widowed I was 26 and I had a 13-month-old kid and a 6-week-old.
Wow, that's very early as well to be widowed.
And he'd been evacuated during the war and taken rheumatic fever, and it affected his heart. And medicine, obviously, in the 50s wasn't the way it is now. And they had an epidemic in 1956 of Asian flu,
Right.
and his heart couldn't take it. He caught it, and
Right.
you know, his heart couldn't take it, so it killed him. And he was 30. You know, but I was left with the two wee ones, so I used to get them to sleep, and then I'd be able to sit
Really?
down, go to the
Yeah.
second-hand shops, book shops, and buy books. And used to get some for sixpence,
Yeah.
and the old money.
Yeah.
And I'd come up the road with about 6 books and so.
Yeah.
So on the subject of marriage, what I mean, from where you are now,
Punishment.
it's you said 3 times.
Yeah.
I mean, from your position in life now, what do you think about marriage?
I think it's only a piece of paper.
Really, right?
Really.
Yeah.
I mean, I think they've got a real advantage of being able to live together before they get married. Because my first husband, I don't think I'd have still been married to him, because after we got married, I found out a whole lot of things, like there was a slight racist thing that came up. If I'd accused him of that, he'd have denied it, but he would say things like packies and things like that, little things, and I've never had that sort of thing ever, right? And I was quite shocked. And
so how quickly were you married from when you, in your first marriage, how quickly were you married from when you met?
6 months maybe.
Okay.
And when did you meet? How old were you then?
Through my cousins. I'd come up to Glasgow, and he came from Glasgow,
Right.
and I met him through my cousins.
Yeah.
But actually what happened was I'd talked myself into it, really, because I'd been in the theatre, didn't really want to do that,
Yeah.
right, eventually. You know.
Right.
Then I'd worked for the army as a civilian, did that for about 9 months, something like that. And then I came out of that, and then I just didn't know what I wanted to do. And so he was there, and he asked me to marry him, and I just said yes. I think I was just.
Yeah.
Do you think that was like a fairly sort of typical situation of those times?
Oh, I
that
think
people
so.
would fall
I
into
think
it?
so.
What kind of age were you when you first met him?
22.
Yeah. Right.
But you have said you got married 3 times. You described yourself as a glutton for punishment. So.
I was. So then I was on my own with the 2 kids for quite a few years.
Yeah.
I met somebody who was a lot younger than me.
Really?
And we ended up going out together, and as I say, I don't plan anything ever in my life. It just sort of happens, you know, things happen.
Yeah.
Lots of things happen. And so we were married, and then I had another kid, and then I was 6 months pregnant, because if you sneezed in my direction, I was pregnant.
And what age were you at that point?
32, I think
Okay.
it was, 32. So anyway, he come home from work one day with complaining about his gums were all swollen and sore, and it was leukemia, and he was dead a fortnight later.
Wow.
So that was that. I was 6 months pregnant. So I managed to do that anyway. But in a way it was an advantage. I think I see so many old women that were so dependent on a man that when he dies they're sort of lost.
Yeah.
And I've never been dependent on, I've always been quite independent, really.
Right.
Yeah.
And so I've never been that way that I couldn't function without somebody with me. You
So
know?
it wasn't like, what am I going to do?
No. Well, obviously that it was hard with money wise,
Yeah.
Yeah.
you know, and but I got there, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then I was 7 years then a widow,
Right.
and I was in my 40s. Well, I think I was 41, I think, and I met a man who was in his 40s and had never been married.
Right.
And he'd been in the theatre as well, so we discovered we knew people in common
Yeah.
after all those
Oh, wow.
years.
Yeah.
And we started going out together, and then I was a Marxist, and discovered the first night I went out with him, much to my absolute amazement, because I never ever met anybody that was the same as me.
Yeah.
And so he was. And
was it thought? I mean, did you feel at the time it was thought of as being quite a controversial thing to?
Obviously it was. People didn't like you being that. I mean, especially coming from a Catholic, extended Catholic family. That I had nuns and priests in the family, that my adopted family. So you can imagine the reaction. I was always the black sheep, and he was the same. Because his father was a lay Baptist preacher, so you can imagine the reaction in his family. So the two of us sort of got together, and we were 25 years married. In fact, the week that he died, we were 25 years married.
Really?
After that, so.
Well, there's something you mentioned throughout that time, which is the theatre. So I do know that you lived in London for a while.
Yeah, I did. Yeah, in Hammersmith.
And who did you live with?
Oh, Lionel Bart.
Yeah. Can you tell us about that time?
Oh well, he was a dancer at that time. It was before he became famous.
What kind of time is this? When did you first?
Oh, the 50s.
Right.
Okay. And just to clarify, Lionel Bart was what I know of him was that he was a film director, right?
Well, and he wrote all those things,
like
and the music and all those
yeah.
things. He was brilliant. But when I knew him, he was a chorus dancer, right? When it was just before he started, doing that. But Lionel was a character, right? And he played tricks on me all the time, but he was very protective of me because he was a lot older.
Right.
So he was very protective because I was very young, at that time.
What was the age difference between you?
Oh, huge. I mean, he must have been at that time about maybe 30, and I was about 18 or something like that, 17, 18, something like that.
Yeah.
And so I shared a flat with him, and he was really, I mean, if I had to go for an audition, he came with me. Wouldn't let me go, because in those days, I mean, they're talking about Epstein and all that, and that was going on all the time in those days. And so he always made sure I was chaperoned when I went. Because he'd been through it all, because he was gay, but he wasn't immune to that sort of thing either. The boys weren't any safer than girls when it came to that.
Sure.
And so I mean, he looked after me, but he did some crazy things. For instance, I was doing Dear Octopus in the West End, playing a child as usual, because that's why I hated it, because I was always a child, because I was small and looked younger than I was. And I was playing the juvenile in that, and Gordon Jackson was the lead in it, right? And he was the Church of Scotland sort of guy, he and his wife, and he drove me home one night from the theatre, he and his wife, and I said, well, I was trying to be sophisticated, and I said, would you like to come up for a coffee, and he went, well, all right, And of course, unknown to me, Lionel had decided to have a party, and all his pals and him were dancing in the living room in frilly ladies' knickers.
Oh, yeah.
So he never came. He never stayed for his coffee.
No.
He went away. He never offered to write. But Lionel used to do things like that all the time, and I loved him. I mean, I thought he was great,
Yeah.
Because I didn't have ever had any ambitions at that time about that kind of thing either. I mean,
it's like an eye-opener for you.
No, it wasn't. For some reason, the fact that two men were in love didn't make any difference to me. I mean, it didn't. I just accepted it.
It's just what they did.
No, that's right. And I never had anything about that. And I've got a step-grandson now. One of my youngest daughters, she's got 4 stepsons, and the 16-year-old announced to us a couple of years ago that he was gay, and I went, I've known that for years. He thought he was telling me something. But I mean, but our family, well, I've brought my family up never to have any prejudices against anyone, because I never had them myself.
I mean, there's something I suppose I should clarify, is that one of the intentions of this channel is connected with well-being, and my impression of you is that you're someone who's whether intentional or not, as an expert at well-being to some extent. So we're kind of wondering about your views on kind of like what do you think about how to live well? What kind of advice could you give?
Well, I think you've got to have a sense of humour.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I mean, when things knock you down, and life does, and I think it happens to everybody at some point in their life, I think you've got to be able to bounce.
Yeah.
You know, you've got to just say, oh, well, you know, there's nothing I can do about it. Instead of lying down to things, you've got to just stand up and be counted, sort of thing. And I think that's it. I think because I was always so stubborn, and that I would never let anything
determined not to let it
get on top of me.
Yeah.
And I've got a daughter who lets it. I mean, I don't know how this happened, but everything's a drama, and everything's terrible, you know. And I've tried to say to her, look, you know, life's too short for that. You can't, you know. And there's not. She's an adult. She's in her 60 now. So you can't change anybody at that age, obviously. But I don't know how that happened, because the rest of them are quite sort of bouncy as well.
Well, I suppose the curiosity I have around that is, where did that come from? Because it sounds like you were always like that to some extent.
Yeah. I think I was just born like that. I don't know. I think I was always very, very determined.
Yeah.
I mean, nobody would, if I got an idea in my head, you wouldn't change me.
Yeah.
I mean, no matter what you did, you know, unless you had some real evidence that I was wrong, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, I would admit it. If I was wrong, I would admit it, and I have been wrong, obviously, many times. But no, most of the time, if I did my research and thought I was right, I would stick to it regardless.
Yeah.
You know.
And what would you say your approach has been in your life in regards to sort of, you know, because people might be curious about things like health and exercise and...
I don't do it. No, as a kid, because I was on the sea, I swam in the Irish Sea all the time.
Oh yeah.
All, you know, from maybe about June right through to September type of thing.
Yeah.
So any time, high tide every day, we checked up high tide, we were in the sea every day after school or in the holidays and things. So I think that was a good, healthy thing to do. And but I, I've never gone to a gym, for instance, or anything like that. I walk everywhere.
You're quite active though, walking.
Yeah, I walk all the time.
You're a real walker, yeah.
Yeah, well, in Stranraer, and obviously during the war there was no buses. Well, they have one town bus, I think, now, but that was an innovation long after I left. We walked everywhere.
Yeah.
And so I was used to it.
Yeah.
We used to go through to Port Patrick, which is really pretty. It's like it's like some of the villages in Cornwall and Devon.
Right.
It's just a wee village, right? And it was only 11 miles from Stranraer. Very picturesque. But there was a castle up in the hill, a ruin of a castle. But we used to go on a Sunday and walk there when I was a kid, proud of us, and play Robin Hood and all sorts of things up in the castle ruins, and then walk back. And my cousins in Glasgow couldn't believe it, you know, because they jumped on trams or buses to go everywhere. But we took that, we thought that was normal. Yeah.
And you've maintained that throughout.
Yeah, I walk everywhere if possible.
And you know, another thing I don't think you've mentioned yet, but I know that you worked on the buses.
Oh yeah, when I was widowed the second time, the only place you could get a man's wage at that time was on the buses, an equal wage. So I went on the corporation buses. That was an experience, you know. Fridays and Saturday nights.
Oh yeah.
Wow.
And of course it was at the time when the pubs closed early. You know, and of course if they had a fallout with somebody on the bus, some man would maybe get the worst of it in a fight in a pub, and you were the first person he saw, the conductors, you see, so he'd start a row with you. So after my first week, when a woman slapped my face for no reason whatsoever, because I hadn't even said a word to her, the worm turned. And after that, the minute they threatened me, I used to go boink.
So you're happy to get physical?
Oh yeah. I mean, guys used to come into the garage, young guys and everything, crying.
Yeah.
And the weekends, it was so bad.
Yeah, right.
And I mean, you had to be tough to survive. Yeah.
So that was another time when you were expressing that kind of determined nature.
I mean, I was a bit of a tomboy anyway, I think. In the street where I lived in Stranraer, it was all boys, so I played football and I climbed trees and did things like that. I did the things they did, you know. So I think I was well able to look after myself. Although I'd never been called upon to fight like that before I went in the buses, but I soon learned.
And I mean, speaking of the physicality of it, presumably you were on your feet all the time.
Oh yeah.
So it's another time in your life where you were active a lot.
Oh, I was running up and down the stairs. And I remember I've got crowns. I've got 2 crowns at the front. I've still got more teeth, most of them, but I've got 2 crowns at the front. And that was because late one night, an old man came on the bus, and there was nobody else in the bus, and we were going out to one of the further bits, and he went upstairs and sat down. So I stood for a while, and then I thought, oh God, get his fare. Walked up, stood in front of him, and he punched me in the mouth.
Really?
And knocked the teeth down. And I nearly killed him. I mean, I really, the pain. I'd grabbed his hair and I was hitting his head on the pole. And my driver saw it in the mirror and he had to come up and rescue him. So we draped him on the pavement.
Wow.
And then on the Sunday, it was a Saturday night, and the Sunday morning I was looking at all the Sunday papers. I bought all the Sunday papers to see if her body had been discovered.
Oh right, it was really like that heavy, yeah.
But I mean, my face was, I was, you know, it was also
eyes,
and the 2 teeth down my throat, and I had to get a crown.
Wow.
2 crowns put in. But that was one of
You've also mentioned to me about, because of the ticket machine.
Oh, you got cracked ribs. That was normal. And we all had that at some point. If the driver had to slam on the brakes, like if somebody walked in front of the bus or another car in front would stop, and your machine sat there, you see, a metal machine, so you would hit the end of a seat or a pole or something like that. And so it was quite common to have cracked ribs or broken ribs. You know, that was the drivers all got ulcers and the conductors all got cracked ribs. That was part of the deal.
I mean, that's funny, isn't it? Because you think about that time, that would just be something that would be accepted, whereas now everyone would want compensation 6 months.
I know.
Yeah.
And America, I mean, they're crazy. You know, I fell in New York I think it was about 10 years ago or something like that, and I'd only come off the plane a couple of hours, and I was in Times Square, and I was going to meet a friend in his Sardi's restaurant, and I turned the corner and they'd been doing some road work, and I tripped and I fell. I've still got a broken eyebrow because nothing they can do about that, you know. My face hit the ground. There wasn't a soul beside me when it happened. Within seconds there was a huge crowd, and they'd flagged down 2 policemen, and you used to see it, and they're all shouting at me, sue and do this. And they flagged down an ambulance, and 2 guys jumped out the ambulance and they're saying, can you see, how many fingers can you see? And I'm saying, I've only banged. But that was...
Well, you told me before about you making quite a lot of frequent trips to New York.
Oh yes, I did.
You had a friend there. And who was that friend?
Well, my cousin, my husband and I used to do a lot of cruising. We liked to cruise, and so we decided to do one up the Amazon, 2,000 miles up the Amazon.
Wow.
So we were both retired at this point. So the first day we went on at Miami, it was really hot, so I thought, I'm going for a swim in the pool right away. And there was a lady in a van sitting in the pool, and one of the staff had said something, and I answered that, and so the lady right away said to me, was that a Scots accent? And I went, yes. Oh, I would like to listen to you in case I ever get a part. And it was Rue McLaren from the Golden Girls. From that time on, we were like that.
Really?
And she used to come over and visit me, and I used to go over and visit her.
But maybe I should just pause to clarify. So the Golden Girls was like a TV show, big in the sort of 80s.
Oh,
right?
yeah.
And Rue was Blanche.
Blanche. She was the Southern Belle.
That's right.
Slept with everybody.
So you can look it up on Google or YouTube. I'm quite sure it'll be there.
Well, when I met her, she was on her 6th husband, and so we became friends immediately, because she was dirty like me. You know? We sort of appealed to each other, and we spent that holiday like. She and her husband, number 6, right? And my husband and I. And just after that, Bill died. That was just before Bill died. But then I was going back and forward to New York to see Rue, and she was coming here and so forth. So we had a great time together, but she was determined I was going to get married again. I was determined I wasn't.
Did she try and set you up?
We'd go to Sardi's and we'd go all sorts of places. And she would go, he's divorced, he's a widower, you know, this is all I got all the time. And she wanted me to stay there. And then, of course, she took a massive stroke. When I say I mean a really massive stroke. And she was ill for quite a while. And I was phoning and, you know, so forth. And one day I got the phone call. She phoned me, and she'd been in a rehab sort of thing to get her speech back and to walk again. And she was still, her speech was a bit impaired, but I could understand, you know, what she was saying on the phone. And she said, when are you coming? Because I can't fly, you know, when you come. And this was, I think, July, I think it was. And I said, oh no, not till September, it's too hot, you know, I can't handle the heat very well, I prefer the cold. And I said, no, I'll come like the autumn, you know, I'll come then. And she said, I've got so much news, but I'll keep it till you come. This was because she was getting read the number 6 and had number 7 lined up, right? This was the news. So that was the Tuesday. On the Thursday at tea time, I got a phone call from her lawyer to tell me that she died.
Really?
And I was absolutely shocked, you know. And that's when he told me what the news was, that she was going to tell me. I said, so she said she'd all this news, and he went, she told Laura to get out, and she was going to. But her husband was lovely. I mean, he was a Broadway producer, the number 6. I got on well with him as well.
So you I mean, maybe before that, but certainly during that time, you must have become quite familiar with New York.
Oh, I know every bit of Manhattan. In fact, how ridiculous I was staying in Queens at one point. Usually I stay in Manhattan, but my youngest daughter was a model. And the guy, she used to do things on the river, like on one of the ships. They used to do a model show, you know, fashion show and that. And the guy who was our boss, who was young guy, he had a flat in Queens, and one of the times I was going, he went, no, stay in my flat because I won't be there. So he gave me his flat in Queens, and I'd travel into Times Square every day, you know, meet people and things like that, because through Rue I'd met so many other people, you know. So anyway, I was on the L train sort of going into Times Square, and there was these people, and they were English, and they heard me talking to a lady on this, and they went, you live here? And I went, no, I'm here just for a couple of weeks. And they went, we want to go to the Empire State Building. I said, when we get off, I'll show you where to go. So I was doing my guide. I've walked every inch of that. And the last time we were there in October, it was my daughter had booked a place, and she said to me, it's Lennox Avenue, and I went, oh yes, and I knew that was Harlem, right, but she didn't know that, right, so I never said anything anyway. So we went, and it was a brownstone. The flat was lovely. I mean, somebody had, done it all up, but the poverty in Harlem since COVID is unbelievable. People can't go to the doctor, they've got no money, they can't get medication or anything. And people like that who had been business people were sleeping in the street.
Really?
Right along the whole of Lenox Avenue where we were. People were sleeping the whole way along the street. And I'm talking about people that had jobs and COVID had their job was gone.
Yeah.
Once their job was gone, there was no safety net, so they were on the street. You know, and I was quite shocked. Because in my travels, because every day in New York I would go a different route. You see, and I had the whole of the island.
Really?
I've done the whole.
You could be like a taxi driver in New York.
That's the only taxi driver in my life I've fallen out with. Was in New York.
Oh, really?
A Russian.
Really?
Yeah. And I was transferring from one flat to another. This was the first time I'd ever gone there, so I wasn't sure of myself, you know. And I was in a flat for a week, and then I was transferring to another flat down at the riverside. And so I had a big suitcase and a hold all, and I'd flagged down this taxi. And he was a Russian, and he grumpy as soon as I got on. And then when we got down to where I was going, obviously I didn't know where it was, but I had this address, and he went, get out. And I went, oh, are we here? Get out. I don't know. Get out. No. And of course we had a right riot, you know. And of course, I mean, taking on a Scotswoman, I mean,
didn't know who was talking to.
A silly man. So anyway, I said, well, you're not getting a tip, you know, because he dumped me on the pavement, and I didn't even know where I was, and I wasn't at the place I was supposed to be, you know. I wasn't that far, but I mean, it was far enough with a big suitcase and all, you know. And so we had a big row on the street, and quite a crowd gathered because voices were raised, and I threatened to thump him at one point. But I says, get in your cab before and so he went away. But then somebody in the crowd told me where, you know, the place I was wanting to go. It was only a street away or something like that. But I mean, he just wouldn't, and I wouldn't even, like when he opened the boot, I had to pull the case out myself and all that. He wouldn't do anything, and that's the only taxi driver I've ever fallen out with, actually.
Did you ever think of moving to America?
No, not really. My family's all here. I mean, there was one point where Bill and I, we used to go down to Stranraer a lot because he loved it down there. He liked to fish and all that, you know. And he thought, we saw a house for sale, a townhouse for sale, quite a big house, and it was about a third of what you pay in Glasgow, you know, for this house. And he was quite tempted as well, and I thought about it. And then we thought about it, no, all my grandchildren were here, and they were in and out the house like yo-yos. You know, we were used to all this, and you know.
Didn't want that to change.
No.
And I mean, another thing I'm kind of curious about, given your, you know, the experience that you've had seeing the world do what it does, and you know, at the moment obviously there's lots of strains politically and war, etc. But of course, from your perspective, you must have seen so many wars begin and end, and also wars being threatened to begin. And so how do you see now?
I find it incomprehensible, to be honest. I mean, after the Second World War, now we've got fascist parties going on. I mean, the history is repeating itself all the time, maybe in different degrees, but certainly repeating itself, and no lessons ever seem to be learned. And of course, it's all about, at the bottom line, it's all about property. I mean, they can say it's religion, they can say whatever they like, but that's what it's about.
Territory.
It's territory and money. And I mean, there's been wars like genocide here, there, in Africa, but if there's no oil involved, nobody pays any attention, and it's so obvious, you know, that this is the and I get quite annoyed. I mean, somebody not long ago said to me, I was quite annoyed that they were complaining about something, and they said, you know, it's terrible, you can't do this. And I went, wait a minute, I says, there's a whole lot worse things happening. There's people dying, babies dying every 7 minutes, and you know, that's terrible, you know. And in a world where we can, I mean, in Canada, they pour gallons and gallons of milk into the St. Lawrence every year to keep the price of milk stable. Now, if somebody could, I don't believe that anybody has visited us from space because it's too difficult, and, but they would have to be really intelligent to get here if they could. Can you imagine their reaction if you tried to explain to them why people went down a hole in the ground in South Africa and places like that, brought up this mineral called gold, and it was transported to America and put in the ground underneath it in Fort Knox? I mean, there's no.
Yeah, it just seems like madness.
It's crazy, and there's a whole lot of things like that I find quite, and I'm sorry for my great grandchildren and my grandchildren because they're inheriting a world that's on its last legs. Well,
is that how it seems to you?
It does seem to me like that.
Right.
I mean, there's madness. I mean, for instance, my daughter gives me a row because she says that people can do what they like, it's up to them. But there's limits to everything. And there's girls that are influenced, they've got to be slim, they've got to, they're getting their lips, they're like guppy fish, getting that poison put in their lips.
Yes.
They're frightened of a wrinkle. I mean, everybody gets old. I mean, it's a natural thing.
Yeah.
And, I mean, years ago in Yugoslavia, we were on holiday in Yugoslavia, and we came in the 70s, we became really friendly with the surgeon, and he was telling us, he says, they come at 50 and they get something done, and then they have to come back at 60. Yeah. But after 60, your skin doesn't have the elasticity, and so you're going to have scar tissue. So you see these girls that are getting all this stuff done, what are they going to be like when they're older? I mean, they're going to really regret it, and I think it's crazy. And my daughter will say, "Oh, you can't say that," and I said, "Well, I do." That's what I think.
If you think it, you think it.
Yeah. I mean, I said to go for an operation when you need it is bad enough.
Yeah.
But to put yourself into that position, for no reason other than vanity, as far as I can see, I think that's madness. I really do.
What do you think it has to do with? Cause I heard you mention earlier that you don't use technology. I'm
not against it. I mean, I just personally don't need it. I don't feel I need it. I think there's a whole lot of people that have things that they could do without. I mean, I remember one of my granddaughters saying, "Oh, I'd die without my mobile phone," and I went, "Good God!" I think I was about 80 at the time. I says, "I've lived all 80 years." Well, I lived most of 80 years without one, and I was only forced to get one because when I moved into the flat downstairs, it didn't have a landline, and just because I couldn't be bothered getting the man in to do it, I just got one. But I only use it as phones out and phones in. I don't use it for anything else. I've never even looked at it for anything.
Don't text?
No, I've never bothered. Don't need it.
So what is it like to sort of come from 1933 and see, what you see now? I mean, if you think about things like Wi-Fi even, or the internet.
Well, I think it's great. I mean, I'm not opposed to, I can see people with business have to have computers and things like that, but a lot of people just sit on it all the time, these Facebooks and things like that, and that sort of thing where, another thing that gets, and my daughters don't agree with me, but anyway, they're a different generation anyway, but those television programmes like Big Brother and all that.
Like reality shows.
I think, oh my God, what a load of rubbish, you know what I mean? And then I go to the hairdressers and they have magazines, and I'll look at the magazine and I'll go, a celebrity, who the hell is that? Because I've never even heard of I mean, I've never heard of them. And they've got these shows that they're talking about their life and all the rest of it, and I'm going, God, what have you done?
I mean, what does it seem like compared to, because of course, you were very involved in showbiz, right? And now, how it is now in terms of like the average public are exposed to reality shows instead of theatre, for instance.
I think it's stopping people from thinking.
Really?
Right.
And that's what annoys me. I mean, everything's to hand now, whereas you had to do things for yourself, and I find that that worries me a bit, because my younger generation, they're spending all the time doing this, and they're not being social, and I find that really sad. Really. And taking an interest in these lives, like, what do you call that family, Kardashians or whatever?
Kardashians.
Bampots as I call them. But anyway, I don't know much about it, but I've just seen it in the magazines and that.
Yeah. Well, you've chosen to not know much about them.
I'm not interested. Yeah. I mean, to me, getting injections to make your bum bigger, when I've been all my life trying to hope that mine got smaller. Things like that I find are crazy. Yeah. I mean, I really think that's crazy, you know. And I'll look at it and go, well, it's beyond me. Yeah. Maybe it's an old age thing, but I mean, I'm not, as I say, I'm not against technology. I'm against often the way it's used. I think that's what it is, you know.
Do your grandchildren and children read in the same way that you do? Luckily,
my 12-year-old grandson, because at his school they're encouraged to do that. He's quite good. He loves all the David Walliams books. That's why everybody in his class calls me Gangster Granny, because that was his favourite book. So he introduced me to all his classmates as Gangster Granny. But no, he does read as well as doing all that
other stuff.
Other stuff. But this was fine. My eldest daughter was a reader as well. She's always been like me. We exchange books a lot and things like that. And but the other ones, magazines, I think. I used to try. Even when they were small, I would read them stories and things like that to encourage them, but it didn't work all the time. I mean, everybody's got their own sort of. You know.
Well, the thing now, there's so much. The reason I asked that question is because I'm aware, just in my own life, I like to read, but there's always so many things you can be doing all the time. Well, just in the world in general, but especially if you've got a phone with all the
but you're young, I mean,
apps and things available, so it's always hard to pay attention to things that require more attention. So to read it's obviously requires a bit more effort, and you've got to be a bit more active than you have to just sit on your phone, as you mentioned earlier, and just passively look at Facebook or whatever.
I think my muscles are quite strong, because I go up to the bookshops and buy books and carry heavy bags with books and then carry them to the charity shop. I must have good muscles. No, I find that I can disappear into a book.
So how often do you read?
Oh God, every day. I read in bed every night.
Right, because we were talking the other day, weren't we, about someone we know who reads around 150 books a year, and we couldn't quite believe it.
I read about 4 a week.
4 a week?
I'm quite a fast reader.
Wow.
I've always been a fast reader. But mind you, they're not all big tomes. If I'm reading something serious, like a book about archaeology, which I'm interested in, things like that, I mean, I'll back and forward and remember, back and say, what did I see there? But if I'm reading a novel, that I can read 4 a week, no problem.
Well, you also, what I know about you is that you did two degrees concurrently, right? And one of those was English. What was the other degree?
The other one was sociology.
Okay. Well, there's
for my job.
That's what you did for us. So, I mean, that was a way of you channeling that sort of passion at the time.
Well, English was no problem.
Where did you study?
Stirling.
Right.
But at the time, I was working on the buses.
Right.
So you're working full time?
I was working full time. And then they had, before the Open University, Stirling University had a course that you could get your study stuff, go to a hotel on a Saturday with a tutor that came through. And it was for people in my position, with kids, are working and things like that. And then twice a year you went for your exams. And so when I was working the buses, on a Saturday I would change with somebody. Like if it was one of the Saturdays I was supposed to be working, I would get a swap with somebody and do it. So I managed to do it that way. And I was determined that when I went to work again, I'd get a good job, which I did. I worked for Glasgow District Council.
What was the funding system like to do a university degree?
I didn't have any funding.
You were able to get grants and...
You could get it, but I had worried mothers. Like, it was one of those things, it's catch-22. If you've got one thing, you can't get another thing, you see. So people could get grants, but I couldn't. So, you know, I just did it. You know?
But there were there weren't tuition fees in them days, were there?
No, not the same now. No. Not like now. There were some, but nothing like now. You had to buy your own books. That was the big expense, you know. But other than that, no.
Yeah.
Not really. And as I say, people got grants, but because I had Wedded Brothers allowance, and I was also working, because one thing didn't affect the other at that point. It would now, because I've cut everything, you know. But at that time, I got a Wedded Mother's allowance as well as for the kids, not for me, but for the kids, and then that, and. So I managed to buy my books, and I was working as well, getting a man's wage. Although I discovered quite early on, if I did overtime, the tax took it off because I had the Wedded Brothers allowance. So, you know, it's one of those things.
Yeah,
you know,
like you say, if you've got it, you don't get the other.
Take one hand gives and the other hand takes it away. So that happened. But no, if I worked the regular hours, I managed to do it.
Well, maybe in conclusion, you know, I'd just like to ask you, what's your, you know, if we were to ask you like how to live a good life, how would you sum that up?
Oh God, that's a question.
Yeah, it's a question.
As I said before, you've got to sort of have a sense of humour and just take things as they come. And
I was interested when you said you've never really. Did you say you don't tend to plan things?
No, I haven't really. No. And if I'd had my life, there was a point in my life when I regretted that I really quite fancied journalism later on, and I thought, well, it's too late now. But you know, if I'd done that, but I hadn't thought about it seriously when I was younger, when it would have been the time to do it, you know. And of course, the theatre that started at 6 years old. So I had a stutter, and so I was sent to elocution classes and I was Queen Victoria with pads in my cheeks at 6 in a play. And so that was fun.
Yes.
But when you're doing it as a job, it's not fun.
Right.
So
like a lot of jobs.
So and as I say, I was always the child in everything, and I hated it. I wanted to be a prostitute or something interesting like that. You know? I never got the opportunity. So. That's why
a quote.
That's why I gave it up, you know, because I was so frustrated and fed up, and young people were all having a good time, and I was working at nights, and you know, there was a whole lot of reasons that I wasn't. And to do that job properly, you've got to have to do it, and I didn't have to do it. I mean, I didn't have that ambition. That, you know, that you have to have.
Well, it's kind of it's interesting because you say you didn't have that ambition. But most of each story, if we take them in isolation, the kind of common denominator is your determination through something.
Well, I suppose.
And presumably that comes along with an ability to be, you know, you say sense of humour, but also positive about your own ability, like believing in yourself.
Oh, I think so. I think I've never really questioned that I could do things. If I decided to do something, I'd do it if I could. And obviously, I've had my failures in life, many of them. But we all have that, and and you just have to sort of pick yourself up and carry on. I mean,
that's kind of like, because in some ways it seems a modern sickness to a large degree, especially with young people, is self-doubt and doubt. Right? But your default almost seems to be the inverse of that.
Right? Well, I think the media's got a lot to do with that.
Right.
I mean, that thing about having all that plastic surgery, that's through fear of getting old, and that the media
pushing insecurities
that all the time. And you've got to be like this, and you've got to be like that. That wasn't there when I was young. And I mean, I wouldn't have paid any. I don't think I'd have paid any attention if I'd been there when I was young. But who knows? But No, I think there's so much pressure
Yeah.
nowadays through
Right.
the media. You
Yes.
know, I mean, all we had was the radio. We didn't even have a television when I was young.
Mhm.
So I mean, you did things on your own. You made up your mind, and you thought, oh, well, I'll do that and I'll do this.
Mm.
Nowadays, it's you've got to do this almost. You know, as if you were forced to do things. And when you're young.
Do you think it was more open then as well in terms of like if you had an idea of what you wanted to do, you'd think, right, I'm going to do that. Whereas nowadays there's all these requirements, aren't there?
That's
You've got to have this, that.
No, you've got to have that. But as well as that, I think, mind you, one big drawback being a female when I was young.
Yeah, right.
And because I was so determined, you know, I
Yeah.
just stood along the men.
Yeah.
Something, just pushed my way.
Yeah.
But a lot of women were really downtrodden in my day.
Do you think that was a very conscious thing, that you were aware that is a drag factor or an influence that was there? And you
I don't know if I was completely aware of it all the time, but I certainly fought against it all the time.
Yeah.
And I mean, I don't think women are any better than men, but men are definitely not any better than women. You know? I mean, definitely not.
Yeah.
But no.
Well, that's I suppose a question I would have for you about, thoughts around, there's quite a lot of sensitivity about sort of gender politics at the moment.
Oh, I know.
And then, of course, without the more recent developments, let's say, feminism, etc. So, because I'm interested by what you said there, where you didn't let it hold you back, and you would push back against it. But you didn't hold it in your mind as a kind of...
No, I don't think I was consciously saying, oh, I'm going to do this because I'm a woman and men are in the sort of top. But I think, I just think because of my nature, I wouldn't let anything, if I wanted something.
So it's much more a self thing than a gender.
Possibly. But I think... I think girls talk about equality. I think it's bad now in some ways. Not as far as work is concerned and education and things like that. But I think because of all that pressure on girls to look a certain thing, and look a certain way, I think it's gone down the way to that extent. They're held back by a lot of things and made feel insecure if they're not this sort of, perfect sort of thing.
Right.
And I remember, I worked with unemployed youth in the worst areas of Glasgow, when I did go to work with the council, and they were cheeky in gangs and things like that, but I sorted them out. But anyway, if they were fighting with me, if they were arguing with me, you said, you old bastard and that, and I used to go, oh, well, I'm old, but you're going to be old and you'll be a bigger bastard than I've ever been. Things like that, and they would laugh then, you see, you could, deflate a situation, make fun of them. And it was... but there's so much pressure on young people now. I don't know how they cope. The suicide rate in young men is so high, and I don't know where that's coming from really to begin with. Why are they made feel so insecure? What's causing that? And I worry because I've got a lot of grandsons and and I've got 4 great-grandsons, a new one that just arrived a couple of months ago. So,
congratulations.
But the wee girls always seem to be a lot tougher from the beginning. Well, you can see, I've noticed a big, like when I worked with young people, we had snooker and table tennis and that for the unemployed and things like that. And after school, if a lot of boys were sitting waiting to have a game. I had a girl that was really good at all the sports. She was really good at snooker. The boys actually allowed her into their team and all things like that. But anyway, if she walked in and it was all boys sitting there, she would just sit down and wait her turn. But if it was girls sitting and one boy would come in, he would just walk back out again because he didn't have he couldn't sit With the girls, he didn't have. So the girls were more secure in that respect, you know. And I noticed it right from the beginning.
And when was this? What kind of era are we talking?
Well, this was in the 70s.
Right.
Yeah. But I mean, I think girls have got more, to a certain extent, they won't be as shy as boys. I think boys seem to hang back more.
Yeah.
In some ways, you know, in that social way.
Yes.
I don't mean in other ways.
Yeah.
But I think in that social way that the boys are brought up to, I don't know if they're brought up that way or whether it's school or...
Do you think that's also the self-consciousness around girls?
I think that's what it is. I think it is.
Yeah.
I don't think girls are so self-conscious. Well, I was never self-conscious around boys, I mean, so I don't think... I mean, they seem to be shyer somehow, you know, they back off.
Yeah, unless they're in a group, maybe.
Oh, aye. Yeah. Oh, when we were away in that cruise there was one of the piano bars had this girl. She was obviously from Singapore, I think she was from, and she was gorgeous by anybody's standard, this young girl. And of course we had the boys with us, so one was 22, one was 20 and the other was 16, and Gabriel's only turned 12. But every night after dinner they were all up at this bar drooling over this girl, you know, and we thought it was
but
hysterical.
not talking to her.
Not talking to her. Gabriel talked to her.
Okay.
He would walk and talk to her. He does that with everybody. He's was very, very secure.
Yes.
But the other boys, they wouldn't talk to her, but they would sit and gaze at her and listen to her singing. And I'd say, go up and say hello to her.
Well, I think thank you so much for sharing your story. We consider it a real privilege, and you know, you're a real treasure. So that's how we see you.
Oh God. So I don't know how I feel about it.
So thank you so much for sharing your story. I mean, we could probably go on forever, really, but maybe, you know, for the sake of living
I don't know. I mean, obviously I could snuff at any time at my age.
Well, we all could, you know. That's
but as my late husband used to say, the only thing that would get rid of me would be a wooden stake through the heart.
Okay. So thank you for listening or watching, if you've been watching, and as ever, if you could like and subscribe, we would appreciate it. And so thank you, Terry. Thank you, Richard.
Thank you.
Thank you.